What do you consider to be sound assessment tools and assessment strategies?
One of the most important things I have learned is formative assessment. Formative assessment is used to gauge student knowledge as well as give students adequate time to reflect on their learning and improve before their learning is graded. One way to effectively integrate formative assessment is by using the formative assessment cycle. The first step is to collect data from a learning experience. Second, analyze the data for what students know and do not know. Then, reflect on the data to plan interventions, extensions, or enrichments. After this has happened, you can implement a plan of action to address the information you have learned from the formative assessment. This process should then be repeated 5 times so students' understanding is properly scaffolded before doing any type of summative assessment.
Exit slips require a written answer, explanation, or solution to a question or concept that the teacher has taught. Through exit slips, the teacher is able to evaluate the students' takeaways of the learning experience while that learning is still taking place. After new learning has taken place, exit slips can be completed by students to show their understanding. Teachers can use the exit slip to plan their next lesson, as they will have a better understanding of what the class knows as a collective, as well as what each student knows. When analyzing what the students have learned, it can become apparent whether or not early intervention needs to take place to guide the students' learning. When reflecting on what each student knows, a teacher can use this formative assessment to bring in different strategies to teach the same lesson for the students who do not seem to understand the topic. Once the data has been analyzed, the teacher should give meaningful feedback to the student based on what they need to do in order to achieve a higher understanding. Once a teacher has this plan for early intervention, the teacher can bring it forth into the classroom to meet every student's need. An example of exit slips that I've used was during the editing lesson that I taught. Once the learning outcomes were communicated to the students using I can statements, I used exit slips for formative assessment. I used the students' work to analyze what they understood and remembered from the lesson and reflected on what needs to be focused on for the next lesson. As the image demonstrates, I gained insight that the student needed more instruction and practice with proper punctuation.
Rubrics are an excellent multi-purpose assessment tool as it can be used for formative, summative, as well as self and peer assessment. They enable teachers to share the assessment process with students while also supporting their understanding of the learning targets. These can help me to make a more informed judgment about the quality of each student's work. It can also help me to see how students perceive their understanding when they self-assess. Also, the language setting rubrics to provide specific feedback enables both teachers and students to monitor learning, take action, and help students advance. In my field experience, rubrics were effective when students were given the opportunity to analyze and classify exemplars. This allowed them to better understand the learning expectations, what quality work looked like, and how they were being assessed. I believe that when students are involved in using a rubric and self-assess their work, they become accountable of their learning as they can track their progress as well as it teaches them how to revise and adjust their work.
Self and peer assessment. Davies 2011 mentions that self and peer assessment is a good strategy because students will be able to self-monitor and practice to give themselves descriptive feedback which is needed to self-regulate and goal set. When being able to use criteria and use the feedback, it will give extra support which is needed for learning. The students will be able to use metacognition, which teaches them to reflect on their own learning. I've seen students learn from one another through using assessment when making stories in my field placement. One student told another student to make sure your story has a beginning, middle, and an end. The student was able to give this feedback because he knew the criteria, showing he was able to set goals for himself and for the other student. This example shows how peer assessment allows for the students to understand the assessment process, helping them to get a clear picture of what is still needed to learn and how to learn it by taking the next steps to set goals and move forward.
Goal setting is important because students need to be able to clearly see what they aim to achieve and then plan accordingly. Seeing the end goal will help ensure that students are taking the right steps to achieve their goal. When students set goals for themselves and record them, then achieve these goals, they will build confidence by recognizing that they can be successful. Also, the simple satisfaction of achieving a goal will trigger more goals to be met and more goals to be set. The power of feedback states that students need to be committed to obtaining goals. Rewards can be an influencing factor to assist motivation for setting and achieving goals. In my field placement, my mentor teacher rewards the students by giving them a high five if they accomplish something challenging.
Technology that has emerged throughout the past several years has also provided us with new tools and opportunities for sound assessment. One such tool that I am particularly in support of is IRIS. IRIS is an online K-12 blog-type digital portfolio with numerous opportunities for effective assessment. Students may set up an IRIS account, make postings of their assignments to track their progress, and access their postings for every grade all the way up to grade 12. Essentially, this means that IRIS can be used for ongoing formative assessment throughout a student's entire school career. Teachers who have new students that have IRIS accounts at the beginning of the school year can access the students' IRIS accounts. They can then get to know the students a little more based on their postings, which will affect their achievements, strengths, interests, and progress thus far. IRIS can even be used for goal setting. By setting specific goals and posting them on IRIS every several weeks, students can assess themselves more effectively. They will be able to clearly keep track of and identify whether or not they accomplished the goals they previously planned to achieve, and then reflect on them to think about what their next steps are. In the future, I'm looking forward to exploring other assessment tools as well, such as scales, concept maps, and multimedia products.
Wow! Those are great assessment tools and strategies. Now, let's move on to the next question.